Nebenstimmen. A podcast by Ensemble Modern. Nebenstimmen brings you conversations on music, art and life between ensemble members and conversation partners chosen by them. Find out what the musicians are working on at the moment and what their personal thoughts are.
Hello, welcome back to Nebenstimmen. My name is Paul Cannon, double bassist of the Ensemble Modern. I'm sitting here today with the very excellent composer and improvising trombonist, Alex Paxton. Alex, welcome to Nebenstimmen.
Thanks for having me.
So the last time we met was, I want to say, the last week of February, or maybe even the 1st of March, 2020.
1st of March, yeah.
And that was a premiere of your piece, I Lollipop.
Yep.
So that was what, 2 weeks before all the lockdowns and all of the Corona stuff really came full force.
Yeah, it was one of the last days it could have happened because the big band, I remember the Frankfurt big band had been shut down that week.
Right.
And then the rest of the world followed.
So, I mean, it's actually very nice to be sitting here with you again and face to face. It's kind of a nice reminder of the before times.
Great.
Well, let's talk about, first of all, that piece and that experience 3 years ago. That was a composition which was part of our Crash Festival, and we had, as we always do, a composition seminar. So when did this process start? Do you recall?
About maybe 9 months before, we came here and met some people. Met you and Uwe and a couple of others.
Right. The pre-planning and all that. So that was with 4 or 5 other composers as well. And
yeah.
So that's a course that we run from time to time, and we're always searching for new names, new talent, and we work quite intensively together. What surprised me in that process already from the beginning was you were quite clear what you wanted to write and what direction this was going to take. You were asking from day one if you could play along as a trombonist, which I'm really glad we said yes to. I'd love to know a little bit about this idea of having an improvising trombone with an ensemble. So this is part improvised and part through composed. For example, all of the score, all of the music which the ensemble is playing is through composed. So you're the only one who really gets to improvise in the piece.
Yeah. So I've written a few pieces that work like this for larger ensembles, contemporary classical ensembles or classical players from a classical music thing, and that they're all notated. And I'm improvising. I'm all improvising. I've usually decided when I'm going to play and when I'm not going to play. And with pieces that work like this, I will have practiced them with a mock-up if it's a premiere or some kind of thing, just to get a feel for them. And usually, the first few days of practicing, it feels. It's not obvious what I'm going to do, and it's quite hard. But then I find that this bit of material works here, and then ideally, if I have a bit more time practicing between finishing writing the piece and actually performing it, then with each section there's a few different bits of material that will work, which is nice to have that freedom. But even if there's just one musical improvisational language that I'm using, that's still fine, and it still feels authentic improvisation.
Well, I had a peek in your part.
Okay.
And that's marked up all over the place. So I'm wondering, how pre-planned are the improvisations?
Well, the part I have. It's kind of more comfort marking. The important markings that I do mark on the part are tonalities It doesn't. My music most of the time doesn't lend itself to jazz chord notational syntax.
Right.
But I do find it helpful to know that this bit's kind of in A flat, or this bit belongs to a mode or something, just to remind me. And then I'm more comfortable writing things that then can change and modulate. The pieces that I write where I am improvising, I feel I'm often writing more space tonally when I know I'm going to be improvising, because if I'm writing lots of fast changing harmony, that's too much to internalize, to cut it, like the most virtuosic tonal meanderings in improvisational music and jazz. It takes a while to get down. I mean, to learn how to play on Coltrane changes or giant steps take ages. So I acknowledge that there's a different set of tonal knowledge. But as a composer, I can work it all out and get it down.
Well, I want to take a step back here, because I don't know so much about your background. So first of all, do you play standard jazz? Is that something you were trained to do?
I
mean, whatever standard jazz means, I have no idea what that means.
I'm not sure. It was definitely as a teenager, that was the educational pathway I was privileged and lucky enough to get on, so that I could get to music college and play, surround myself with that kind of professional musician lifestyle. So I didn't really, I didn't really have much exposure to new music or even 20th century music other than jazz and pop and show music until I was 19 and came to the Royal Academy of Music in London, where I was principal study jazz trombone. Okay. And then when I got there, I took an interest in the contemporary music course, which basically has nothing to do with the jazz, the course there, and found all this other music and was really excited by that. So I felt I needed to concentrate on that. So eventually, after a couple of years, I re-auditioned and kind of was principal study composer for a bit.
Okay. Did you have some classical training on trombone as well?
I did. I do owe a little bit. I had a few years lessons with a classical trombone player who helped me sort out some holistic technique stuff. But basically, I'm not a classical. I wouldn't count myself as a classical trombonist, because I don't come from that sound. I don't make a classical sound, and I'm not so interested in doing it. I feel my trombone technique, which really is a physical thing, a technique, as you'd understand. I feel that is coming from a jazz trombone lineage. And in terms of the physicality of my playing and the sounds that I'm working with, not to mention the creative tradition, certainly I'm 100% signed up to that lineage of jazz trombonists, I feel. Okay,
so if you're coming more from, I mean, as you say now, very much so from the jazz scene and from that culture. How is it now to work with professional classical musicians who I suppose would have a somewhat different attitude?
Well, if we're I mean, ultimately, I just my artistic, desire and thrust is I just want to make the music that I want to make, regardless of what hashtags it come under.
Me too.
But look, that's the artistic thing. But it is useful to kind of be aware a little bit of hashtags to be able to communicate with the world. And I would hashtag, as I just said, I'd hashtag myself off as a jazz trombonist, but really I'd hashtag myself off as a contemporary classical composer. Most of my work is written for classical musicians, though I do work with improvise and groove musicians, and I would associate myself with that lineage of composers. Until the last couple of years, so post Lollipop, I wouldn't necessarily. Another hashtag I find interesting to think about is a groove composer. And some of my work I've been heading that in the last couple of years. So I would associate this as a jazz composer thing. I would say Carla Bley is a groove composer, and Mingus, and to throw a few more local names in from the UK, Rebecca Hutchins and Laura Jerd are all groove composers, and I wouldn't really feel that, even though so I Lollipop has a lot of influence of groove, but I wouldn't say that's the central intelligence of the music. But some of the stuff I've been writing since is a little bit more groove focused. I've forgotten what we were talking about. Jazz, hashtag contemporary. So actually, contemporary classical musicians. This is part of my craft as a composer, and I am actually very comfortable with it. And this is what I'm always been excited. I've always been composing, since I've been notating things since I was about 10, and composing in just the way children are creative. And the thing that has always attracted to me with working with musicians from a background of notation, whether they're classical or not, is the notation, because the notation means that the composer, it's really exciting to make the music that I want to hear, and notation enables me to do that as a composer, and that's super exciting. And working with something like Ensemble Moderne is really great, because you have a really strong notation tradition,
right, and
something very substantial in terms of listening experience. So it's my favorite kind of group of people to write notation for, because there's a shared listening lineage, which is really important.
Right.
And writing for a classical music orchestra is really fun, and I find it's a slightly different instrument. And part of understanding the idiom of that instrument for me is that a classical orchestra folks have a different listening life.
Exactly. I mean, we'll all have a different relationship with notation. Mm-hmm. And I think the farther astray you go from the classical tradition, the more open to interpretation, let's say.
This is exciting, yeah.
So I don't think the Ensemble Moderne necessarily stands for an extremely literalist interpretation of notation, unless we know exactly what it's supposed to be.
Right.
When we've worked directly with the composer and they've told us in so many words that it is like this and it's not like that, then we know. Mm-hmm. But I mean, just as an aside, one of the things I've taken away from my years here has been realizing how quickly pieces can change when the composer's in the room, and that's really colored my understanding of old repertoire.
Okay.
And things like classical or romantic music, and realizing if the composer was alive and in the room, in the rehearsal, and hearing it in that context, who knows what they would change?
Yeah.
Because they would be reacting in real time. Mm-hmm. And that's something we've lost. That now these scores, they're 200 years old, and we treat them like holy texts that cannot be altered or questioned. And that's something maybe there's room for development there.
Oh, that's nice to hear. This is really nice that I've liked working with Ensemble Moderne, and because I feel I hope I'm not as autocratic and precise as maybe some other composers I've met. It doesn't matter what other composers think. I hope I'm not. I'm really excited by different interpretations, and now. This is the 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the fourth on time that I've taken I Lollipop out the box,
right? And
I have recordings, at least archivally, of the others, and it's really fun how they differ.
Everyone takes a different approach.
Yeah, and I really want my music to have that. In some sense, an ensemble, trying to facilitate an ensemble or an orchestra to get into my music there are some things that are unnegotiable a little bit, like rhythm. Sometimes I think quite hard at how to facilitate certain groups of musicians to engage with the rhythm, and the pictures are already written. But then once those things are down, I'm really excited about what else it can be, and the expression. And I'm often writing with this really heightened energy. And I'm excited about what that can mean in reality for an ensemble like this, and what happens when, however, 18 musicians in Ensemble Modern are playing, with the intensity of an Evan Parker solo. Mm-hmm. This is an exciting thing to think about. An I Lollipop isn't as dense as an Evan Parker solo, but there are moments where it might feel a little bit like that.
It's not dense. I wanted to talk a bit and ask about this question of aesthetics. Because for me, you have a very special and unique aesthetic to your compositions. It's very often, some of the adjectives I could throw out might sound negative, but I really mean it in a very positive sense. That it's overloaded with information. One very quickly gets a sensory overload. But I can't tell you how many times I've listened to your album Music for Bosch People. I'm such a big fan of this album, and it's because there's so much information. It rewards repeated listening, and what I'm amazed by as well is you can have so much material, and any piece of that material is already by itself a great idea, which could have been its own piece. That's my reading of it.
I like that.
And you breeze by these things sometimes, and it just flitters by, and I'm momentarily fascinated by that aspect or this aspect, and it just rushes past. Some things you dwell on, and some things just flow out, and it does feel like a composed improvisation. So I'm curious, first of all, about the process of composition that you take, because you're not coming from this strictly classical background, and you're not necessarily thinking of it as a jazz musician, just putting down some chords and here's a nice melody, here comes the bridge, blah, blah, blah. That's not what that is. How are you generating the material, first of all? Are you actually sitting down with your trombone and improvising? What does it look like?
Well, thanks, and I'm pleased it comes across like that, and I feel like I'm trying... I'm making the music that I always had this feeling that I wanted to make music like this, and until my work kind of maybe it's boring to say this, but it got out of a studenty phase, and enough things clicked into place that I thought, this is what I want to be. This is it. I forgot what I was saying. Yes, but I like this is important. This is important, and I don't. Yeah, and it's not. I'm not sitting at the trombone. I don't compose at the trombone.
Well, what does it look like if you're composing? Yeah. I say you need to write a piece today.
Yeah.
Where do you go? What do you do?
Well, I'll do whatever it takes. I'm also motivated to get the music, and I'll use whatever tools I need.
So it's a different process every time. Like you don't just sit down at a piano, or
a little bit. I've got a desk with a computer and pen and paper and a laptop and a keyboard and bits of synthesizers and bits of trombone. I also keep a sound diary of tunes that I'll, when you're going on a walk or going shopping, and they're not. I find this is part of my composer craft now, for sure. I feel it's super important for me, and I think I try and represent this when I'm in educational settings or whatever, to present creativity. This is the way I like to think of it. It's a river that is always flowing through everybody all the time. And so a practiced creative artist is good at getting to that river that's always flowing. It's a subconscious thing. It's part of being human.
Is it so easy for you to find material? You're just dipping your hand in the river and taking a cup of water?
Well, that's what I want it to be, and I facilitate my life so that's what I want to set myself up to be doing. Because the times when I have had a creative block or that blank page thing feel horrible. So I'm not going to say I never have that now, but I try very hard to never have that. And so I'll set myself up, if I'm doing, every day to make, that's the ideal, that I'm dipping my hand into the river of creativity. But so sound diary and improvising and composing every day and all these kind of things.
Do you find yourself second guessing the material, or you really trust yourself when you put it on paper?
Oh, that's a good question. I do sometimes second guess myself, but generally I like to present to people when I'm thinking about art that I would represent not second guessing, because I feel the subconscious of any human is so much more interesting than 3 brains of the cleverest humans put together for me. So I feel that that's where I want art to come from, and I mean that not dismissing anything that is calling itself art, because I feel even art that feels like it's coming from brainy and not feely is actually, it's good because it's also coming from feely. That's my analysis of it, even if that's not how artists would identify. But
I think I understand you. I mean, this juxtaposition of improvisation and composition, I mean, the big advantage in an improvised set, I also enjoy improvising. That's something we do in the ensemble sometimes. And the big advantage is you don't have time to second guess yourself. If you start even a little bit second guessing, the whole thing falls apart. So you must know that better than anyone, that improvisation and second guessing should have nothing to do with each other. You just go. And the sort of double-edged sword of composing something and putting it on paper is you have every opportunity to second guess and revise.
This is a good thing to mention. I can say something now, or you can carry on, finish.
Why don't you say something?
Okay. Yes. I've forgotten what I was going to say now. So the thing is about this, right? That I tell myself, because it's not nice to. This is part of the composing experience that I don't like. So this is the main reason for working like this. And definitely when I was a student, I think had things like blank page things, and I'd second guess myself. But for me, the motivation for writing music, even though it's amazing to hear people play it, is actually the process of writing it. That is. So I want to make this as good as possible. So the experience as good as possible. So I often think the thinking that I'm thinking, and I think this is relevant and not just me psyching myself on. I think this is an artistic comment, is that something once an idea cooks, it'll become good, because I will know it, and because I will cook it, and I will start to understand it. So it's a nice story I like to tell myself to enable me to write, is that it doesn't matter about how good, in inverted commas or not, that initial idea that I've got on paper, because in 3 weeks' time, when I've been working on it, it'll turn into something that I feel is resonating with what I want to say, like a sculptor, chiseling away at the rock. It doesn't matter if it's a good piece of rock, because you respond to its inner structures and its inner densities and lines, and that becomes part of, because you've been working on along and you're going at it chisel by chisel. I've said enough. I've collaged enough words together for you to get my point now, I think.
I'm surprised at how similar your thought process is to your composition.
Okay.
You keep bouncing around different ideas, but they're all really interesting ideas. Do you put? I mean, you were talking about hashtags earlier. Do you actively think about your music in certain boxes and genres and hashtags?
I think no, but sometimes playing that game of thinking about it is interesting in a way that I find lots of things about music and commentary on music interesting that I don't do myself. But really, I feel I really need to emphasize that I'm just writing something that I want to write, and possibly on top of that, and the world is letting me play and articulate. For example, the Music for Bosch People is my ensemble that I made especially to play music for Bosch People, and there was a real world calculation because I knew that this great, really good saxophone player friend, and I knew these people who were called David Zucchi, and I knew these people who were going to be able to read the notation and put the work in, and I knew these people that were going to be amazing groove musicians and improvisers. But other than that, I didn't make a real context. But then something like I Lollipop, that's part of the idiom of existing as an artist, that it's written for Ensemble Modern, is an established orchestra. So that's nice. And then bouncing around back to the original thing, I was going to say that I absolutely... So yeah, but I really am trying to... I'm just making the music that I would be making anyway. And I feel the same feeling... The music is my thing that I want to do for being alive. This is how I want to spend my life. And it's the same feeling when I wrote some songs when I was 9 or 10. I now have the composition technique that they come out right. I feel it's the same bit of life that I'm tapping into or something. So it doesn't need to sit in hashtags. Mm-hmm. But I'm very interested in thinking about hashtags, for example, especially thinking about jazz lineage and then where jazz goes where jazz goes from pop music after Ellington into more subversive musics like bebop, and then off Ornette Coleman and the AACM. And especially the AACM, because there's amazing people like George Lewis who are like these fierce academics and have lots of thought on this. And also Anthony Braxton, his semi-mist... I think it's fair to say there's an aura of mysticism to his writing and his thinking in words. This I find I feed off this a lot, even though I really don't have a feeling for being an academic myself. But I get a lot out of that.
Sure. I mean, in terms of aesthetics, we touched on it already a bit. That stylistically, what you're going for, I recognize a lot of the ideas as coming from somewhere. Maybe I don't know the name behind it or necessarily, but what I'm absolutely fascinated by is just the combination of ideas. That I was so touched today in our rehearsal that the very end of the piece of I Lollipop, that you found a certain feeling I've never seen before. And it was somehow very sweet, nostalgic, and silly in that combination. That you had this absolutely touching, beautiful melody, nice chords, very melodic, but at the same time it's with kazoos and stylophones, and it's such a strange, beautiful mix. It really touched me.
Oh, thanks very much.
How do you think about these? Man, it's such a stupid question, but how do you even come up with that?
Thanks for asking that. I think the answer is quite boring and ordinary, and I do these things on purpose. So I want to take credit for that. But actually, I don't. something that I don't do that other composers who are alive and I find really interesting do is plan out how the styles are going to interact. And I don't label styles. Instead, I just work with melody. Most of my pieces, I could write out, if it's a half-hour piece, I could write out a 30-minute tune, monody, and it would... So most of my things are coming from melody, and then it grows from there. So usually I write the melody first, and sometimes I write the rhythm first or the pitches, then I write the harmony or counterpoint, counterline. I write all the lines and then I write all the harmonies and then I orchestrate it, which sounds very conservative. I bet Elgar probably did something similar.
Yes.
So that's why it's a bit disappointing answer, but that is the composer craft.
But you
that I
know,
use.
somehow that's quite unique. That you do spend quite a lot of time talking about melody and harmony, and you know, there's not so many composers who would only focus on that. Not that you only focus on those, but would sort of put those at the forefront.
I think that I don't want to... I think for a listening experience, harmony and melody don't have the same hierarchy as they would in Bach, though I hope that I can siphon a little bit of that Bach magic for the way the lines interact, because it's just chronologically in the composition process, that's what I write first, because for the listener, I don't think there is that hierarchy, and actually the sound, the orchestration and the noise, they're just as important for the listener, kind of on an equal... But it just so happens that my process feels more traditional composer, because I also I love lines and I love harmony, but I also love Merzbau and Rebecca Saunders, and I've learnt a lot from those. I've learned a lot from those in the way that I've learned a lot from people who I learnt harmony and line from. I want my music. I would claim that my music is very product based in one sense, in that I'm really ultimately I want to make this sound experience, and I'm not interested in musicological like symbols, even though music that does that is interesting to me, but it's process based in that I want to create this feeling whilst I'm writing, and part of that feeling while I'm writing is my listening life. And I want to, though I know people who are much more prolific than me, I want to have a prolific listening life, and I want to listen to as much as possible, and I want to be challenged, and I want to learn, and I also want to steal and know how things are done, and I feel this is where my music is coming from as well. So in the same sense as I love, and most musicians I met and composers and creative musicians love line and love harmony, that's often what attracts most musicians in the first instance, at least on a cognitive level. That's what attracts them. But totally forgotten what I'm talking about now. Can't remember. I lost it.
I lost it too. I also wanted to ask, we've brought up the term hashtag a few times. I know that you're very active on social media. Maybe not overly active, but you do post quite a lot. And I'm curious, this is more from sort of a business side.
Yeah.
Is that strictly business? Do you have fun with that? Is it important to you that you have some interaction with your fans?
That's a really good question, because I'm really not sure what the answers are, and it's people have started to say things like this, even though it doesn't feel like it. I think my natural way of being was, at least, I'm not sure anymore, not to do social media at all. I never post things of my admittedly few friends and social. I hate that, and I was very uncomfortable doing it originally, but I felt it was a necessity for my for my composing. So I think there are some important things I would like to say here. I just hope I've got them in the right order queued up to come out of my mouth. I didn't do it for ages. I was very uncomfortable, and I'm very workaholic, which is a privilege to be able to do.
But I think most of us have kind of a shyness naturally, that we don't automatically think, oh, I'm so amazing and I just have to show the world how great I am. I think for a lot of musicians that's not so easy to take that step.
Yeah, that's a really important thing I need to say. I think, I was very introverted and wanted to do the other way. But eventually, ultimately, the process is that I want to spend as much as my life existing in the world writing music. And for nearly 10 years in my 20s, even though I was working very hard at writing, trying to do this, financially, I earned a living being a classroom primary school teacher, which I've now retired from.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I would say that without social media, I would not be in this situation. Even though teaching primary school children, it was a really rich and fortunate bit of my life, it's very exhausting for someone who wants to spend as much time as their life writing music. So, and I think there's something really important I need to say. Yes, and this is my natural way of being, would be to not shout about it, and I'm a little bit still uncomfortable about it. But and in the last few years, some really fortunate things happened to me and my music, which means I can now spend more time writing music, because this is a financial thing. Part of being an artist in the real world, I feel, is the craft of how to survive in the real world.
Exactly.
And social media is part of this, though. And there's something really important, but really, without social media, I really feel I would not be in this position. Also, I now have do some really nice teaching I love so much, and the important thing I need to say about social media is, and in its defense. Okay, no, before we get there, the other great thing about social media, the nicest thing that's happened really is that I've made connections with people that I wouldn't otherwise made connections, and found kin with genuine artistic relationships with artists who I feel I share a kinship with. An example of an artist is Neil Luck, who I definitely met on social media. I listened to his stuff on the radio, and I sent him a message and say, hey, I like your stuff on the radio. And I've done this with a few people, and this is amazing because I wouldn't be able to meet them. I wouldn't have met them otherwise. And I've worked with them, and I've played on his album, and we've worked together. And also we can meet, I can't think of an example, but I've met some kind of bigger names as well who live in America that I've never been to America. I wouldn't otherwise know. So that's really nice. But the important thing to say about social media, I think...
You found it. Yeah,
is that... this is part of being an autonomous artist. If you're going to, this is allowing much more access to high art and classical music than ever there was before. Because the alternative to being as a art composer to making that financial, so you don't have to have another day job. The alternative is to wait for the secret classical music world to say, yes, we want this person to have a career. It's waiting for the publishers and the people who book, these institutions and orchestras. That's how it has always happened until social media. You can only get in that world if you go through the official gatekeepers. And I've met a few of them, and they're very easy to spot because they often introduce themselves as, hello, I'm a gatekeeper. This is the alternative thing in the world, and a way to do it. But the amazing thing that social media has meant, that as an artist you can present yourself as the artist you want to be, and define yourself publicly, even with a small reach. And I think this is for whatever else social media is doing, and however it might be difficult, for mental health and whatever, this is a really good thing, because classical music suffers terribly from elitism and snobbery and classism and racism and all these other things. And social media can really help people get through the gatekeepers and to present that. Yeah. And that was the important thing I wanted to say about social media. So
it was worth waiting for. Well, on that note, no, I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. And I think for all of its disadvantages, the internet shines a lot of light in places that we couldn't see so clearly before. Mm-hmm. And in a way, there's no hiding. So it does keep certain activities a bit more honest and a bit more fair-minded, let's say. But I think it's still getting on your own 2 feet, that does take some work and some courage to put yourself out there and accept the trolls if they come and so forth.
Yeah, I think also because you say about getting on your own 2 feet and stuff, I kind of feel that the more original somebody's ideas are, the more an emerging artist perhaps needs to take responsibility for presenting themselves. Perhaps it is on the other secret side of classical music. It's perhaps easier to get in if you're writing closer to a style that is already established.
Well, I might be putting words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're arguing that music itself is developing in new directions because of social media.
This is a nicer way of putting it, yeah.
Which is a really interesting thought, actually. I don't know where to go with that thought, but it is something to be aware of, I suppose.
Well, the thing that really, just from you saying that, the thing that I think is really exciting about artists now and how art is changing, I think for me it seems, is the presence of the internet. And for the younger the composer now, the bigger percentage of their life they have grown up with the internet.
Right.
And this is just, for an artist, I think this is crazy. Like, even when I was doing my undergrad 10 years ago, if I wanted to listen to something, I had to go to the library and get a CD out. And so I could only really listen to as music as was as obscure as the music college library decided was good for listening. But now there are still obscure things that aren't online, but there's a lot of obscure things that are, and that's amazing to change. I think that changes the diet of an artist.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember Napster, that beautiful brief period where we had free access to everything, long before Spotify and things like that. And it was completely wasted on me because I had no idea what to look for. The information wasn't there. And by now it's so much easier to look and to check. I mean, you said you're trying to have what did you call it? A deep listening experience? No, a
prolific listening.
Prolific listening
Quantity
experience.
over quality.
I hope this podcast is a prolific listening experience, by the way. No, but what are some of the resources you use? Where are you looking for new inspiration? Do you just hit random on Spotify and see where it goes?
I try to remember things that I'm listening, although I swear I know lots of people who do this much better than me. Radio programs are wonderful because most of the time, they're professional people who have perhaps spent their working week searching for this music.
It's curated. Yeah.
And they've put in a lot of work. So if I then write down everything that was on this radio program, I feel like I've taken all their time, knowledge, and this is wonderful. And Bandcamp's amazing. I learned so much from all its articles and its playlists.
Bandcamp.
Bandcamp is great, and things like I don't have enough time to go through all of these in their monthly app, but also like magazines, like new left field music magazines. That just to go through the list and check out all the stuff and remember it at least superficially, I find really useful.
So how much time do you spend listening to music in a week, let's say?
I wish the answers to these questions I could exaggerate by about 60%, because I do like. Yeah, I wish I would like to have more time to listen, but I do try and listen, and I've kind of considered this just a really good way to exist. If I'm existing and I can feel the throbbing of musical waves into my body, this is a good way to have spent my existence. So I will listen whenever I can to music. Sometimes I get a bit, it stresses me out a bit, and I'll listen to an audiobook or something instead. But in all the gaps, and also I don't listen to music when I'm making music and playing music. That would be distracting.
That would be very difficult, yes. Well, one last question before we sign off here. Mm-hmm. Can you explain the title of I Lollipop? Or maybe before you do, I can give you the impression it gave me.
Okay.
It sounds like Apple has produced candy. And I mean, that's what it suggests. Also from the spelling and the capitalization. And in some sense, I suppose that's in there, that there is a lot of electronics and many moments which are sticky sweet and this kind of thing. So you put a lot of images in one's mind in this piece.
Thanks. I'm glad it comes across. That's what I wanted to do. I'm trying hard to get better at titles, and my titles are definitely much better than they were. I retitled some pieces. Like there was a piece that I still like and is coming out on an album I'm releasing in April called Happy Music for Orchestra. And it's one of the first pieces when I thought, oh yeah, like this. And it was called Purple Tree Tapestry, because I was kind of using some of David Hockney's pictures to kind of solidify some abstract feelings. But now it's called Strawberry, which I think is much better title. And the last piece I wrote in the last big ensemble piece I wrote in the summer was called Shrimp Bit Babyface. Which I like as well, but the I Lollipop, yeah, the I from the iPhone and the I and the lollipop sweetness, the pop, like onomatopoeia, and also pop arty, yeah, all the imagery. I try. In once when I'm thinking of titles, I usually do it at the end, and it's kind of hard, and I like to think that I write music that's quite uncompromising, so I like to work hard to give a title that can really help people in that might be not have a way in. I feel like people who are going to like the music anyway are going to like it anyway, but then there's some other people, and maybe a good title would just really help someone to
Sure.
kind of understand the energy. So I felt I Lollipop was the right set of images and stuff for that. And Lollipop also has something. There's something hyper pop about it, right? Like
right.
Sophie has a piece called I Lollipop, and there's an artist called Mika who had a piece about lollipops and a few pieces about lollipops. And lollipops generally are a little bit sexual, but also very colourful and sweet and something. Anyway, all these things felt like it was the right title.
Okay. Well, the next performance of I Lollipop will be at the Eclat Festival in Stuttgart, 1st of February 2023. I hope this podcast comes out before then, but if not, y'all missed it. Alex Paxton, thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me.
That was Nebenstimmen, a podcast by Ensemble Modern.